Do you want to transition now to DC? So, with Batgirl getting pulled and the constant upheaval in DC films, what do you think, or what hope do Snyderverse fans have of their Cavill Affleck universe being restored? Some reports.
As my father used to say when I asked him for something, that the answer is between slim and none, and slim just left town. That
Oh
is
no.
basically where it stands. Look, online discourse notwithstanding, Warner Brothers made a lot of mistakes in the run up to Justice League and in the treatment of Justice League.
Okay.
And online discourse aside, Zack Snyder's 4 hour Justice League is a better movie than the studio compromised theatrical cut that came out in late 2017. Um, and for that matter, I think it's better than a lot of other comic book movies that have been in theaters that have done very well. But general audiences were not big on the so-called Snyder universe. Man of
Why not?
Steel, I'm sorry?
And why not?
Well, Man of Steel wasn't a great movie. It was dark and morose and had a ridiculously violent third act, which implicitly put the blood of a couple 100,000 people on Superman's hands.
Okay.
That to me wasn't a deal breaker, whatever. My big problem is that if you've seen the movie, if you make anyone other than Clark Kent be the one that touches the button that makes the aliens come to Earth, then it's fine, whatever. Then it's not his fault. He's doing what he has to do to save the world, and there's collateral damage, and that sucks. But anyway, when the film slightly underwhelmed, it did 291 domestic, but from $128 million opening weekend. It did 668 worldwide, which might have been okay if Warner Brothers, certain executives at Warner Brothers weren't screaming that it was going to do Harry Potter numbers,
Mhm.
which never do that. If you're a studio exec, never overestimate. You always undershoot. You always set the ball, you
And
set
then
the
over
bar as low
deliver.
as exactly, then you over deliver. But anyway, um, the film was just not terribly well received by paying consumers. There was always a risk of what I like to call the Tomb Raider trap, which is named after the underappreciated sequel, Tomb Raider in the Cradle of Life, which was a much better film than the first Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider, but flopped because everybody hated the first Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider. So you make a movie, a franchise starter. It does relatively well. It opens huge because of interest, because of hype, because of all of the factors involved. Then you make but it's a lousy movie. Oh no, what do? We make a sequel anyway. You make a better sequel. You make a good movie. But audiences are once bitten, twice shy.
Long story short, you are out here dashing the dreams of the Snyderverse fans.
I think there is a lot of numbers and data and general sentiment to show that general audiences either didn't like the Snyderverse or didn't
Yeah.
care about the Snyderverse. And I think, frankly, and this is my opinion, I think Walter Hamada, who was brought in to take over after Justice League, was doing a damn good job. And the plan was working in terms of making slightly connected, but disconnected if they have to be,
Mhm.
varied, interesting, diverse, not just in terms of demographics, diverse movies that allowed for just a weird cinematic universe where like Birds of Prey and Joker could somehow coexist. I think unfortunately there's DC got kneecapped by COVID. Absent COVID, Wonder Woman 84 would have been a big hit. Absent COVID, nobody would have bothered to spend $70 million to redo the Snyder cut of Justice League to bring that whole fan base back into the front of the debate table. But I think with David Zaslav being obsessed with cutting costs, for better or worse, I think the last thing they're going to do is spend hundreds of millions of dollars to appease a vocal minority fan base that gets loud on Twitter a lot.
And so, do you think Batgirl getting pulled was a good idea?
No, I understand the sentiment. I really do. I think, and I'm going to speculate, so please bear with me, the film wasn't good, but it was also not good in a very specific way that you often see in streaming pictures, because in a lot of streaming films, people get paid up front because there's no back end, there's no residuals, there's no points. Less of that $70 million budget gets accorded to the production value than you'd see in a theatrical picture, where certain actors are maybe taking less money up front for more behind the scenes. And that's why, a film like Red Notice or The Gray Man, whether you like them or not, they're $200 million movies that don't have the production value associated with a theatrical $200 million picture because
Mhm.
everybody's getting paid top dollar up front.
Got
If
it.
I had to take a guess, I'd say what happened with Batgirl is that it was a $70 million movie, but it was a streaming $70 million, which means it looked cheaper and felt smaller than 70 to $90 million pictures, or even $110 million pictures. Because with COVID and everything, I think the budget went up to 80, 90 million, like Deadpool 2, Shazam, Logan, et cetera, Venom.
Mhm.
So I think Zaslav deciding to make DC theatrical only in terms of its movies, he was stuck with this movie that allegedly wasn't very good, but also was so small in scale that you'd actually basically have to spend an entire budget's worth of movie to make it theatrical worthy.
Got it.
So that's my thinking of why that probably happened. Does that mean I think he'd made the right call to ditch it? I don't think so, because the bad press is going to cost them. I think it sends a terrible message to talent that you can treat a $90 million movie with the same disregard that you treat a $30 million unaired Game of Thrones pilot. Because in television, pilots get junked all the time. I mean,
but this is almost unheard of, right?
For a movie, yes.
Okay.
Especially a film this high profile from such a franchise, yada, yada, yada. I mean, there are films that get buried. They're just films that you've never heard of. But it was unprecedented, and it sent a terrible message to talent. And the optics of junking an uncommonly diverse female, non-white, female-led DC superhero movie with a bunch of not a white guy talent involved is a bad message.
Yeah, that's definitely a bad look.
Fair or not, the optics stink.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is eating the $90 million versus getting your tax break worth not getting the god-awful publicity that's following you around for the next few years?
Of course.
I would say no, but it's not my money.
I do want to ask you, what is your biggest takeaway from the 2022 summer movie box office?
And I want this to be said like the title of Mars Needs Moms. Theaters need movies.
Okay.
The overall domestic box office, I'm going to cheat and use the Box Office Mojo spreadsheet here. The overall domestic box office in terms of movies that came out in the summer of 2022 made $3.1 billion worldwide.
Okay.
That was over 140 releases. It was the amount of movies released was 140 versus in 2019, which was the last non-COVID year, 276 movies came out in the summer of 2019. The only reason we're not talking about a 45% drop in grosses, 3.1 billion versus 4.1 billion, is because Top Gun so egregiously overperformed as to knock the entire overall summer slate up to a minus 25%.
So Top Gun really carried the team here.
As silly as it sounds, as hyperbolic as it sounds, Tom Cruise's Top Gun really did save movie theaters this summer.